Hey everyone, I am back today with another collaboration, and today's collaboration actually builds off the original one from Scrolling into Trouble. In the last collaboration, I failed to elevate the perspectives of neurodivergent individuals who were not BCBAs. Specifically, today I elevate the voice of Oswin. Now, throughout this discussion, some very interesting things are uncovered. To start, Oswin was targeted by the authors of Scrolling into Trouble. Explicitly, they wrote Oswin gave a keynote presentation with the purpose of trying to defund ABA. Throughout this interview, we actually find out that this is not true, and that the authors were using a journal as propaganda to portray their message. In the end, Oswin is not a fan of ABA, but it still doesn't hide the fact that individuals with PhDs in the field of ABA targeted Oswin through lying in a journal. Even if Oswin and I do not see eye to eye on everything, it doesn't mean I can't elevate Oswin's perspectives. The field of ABA is in a time where we need perspectives from people like Oswin. With that said, if you want to see me uncover some juicy details throughout this interview, I highly suggest that you stay around for the entire thing. But before we get into it, let's meet Oswin. Oswin Latimer is a bigender, Choctaw, and neurodivergent person. They are a proud autistic parent to 2 adult autistics and 1 neurodivergent child. They have been a neurodiversity activist for over 15 years, including doing transition age policy work in Washington, D.C., and now serves as the founding director of Foundations for Divergent Minds. In their downtime, they enjoy going to karaoke, arcades, and listening to live music. Now that we know a little bit about Oswin, let's get into the interview. I'm here today with Oswin. So, Oswin, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell me about your organization, Foundations for Divergent Minds, and maybe explain why we came to collaborate today.
Okay, so I am Oswin Latimer. I'm an autistic adult. I am in my 40s. I've been working in the autistic activist community for 15 plus years. I used to work in DC at the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network as the director of community engagement, and then 6 years ago formed Foundations for Divergent Minds as a way to do disability justice work specifically for people with developmental neurotypes. So that's going to be autistic people or ADHD or dyspraxia or dyslexia and so forth, through a model that I created based off of neuroscience.
Okay.
Sorry, a model framework specifically. So it's not meant as a standalone therapy thing. It's meant to support neurodivergent people before you ever get into the education part, before you ever get into the therapy part. This is the basis of it. And we do it all. So all of it is based in neurodiversity community writing, going back into the late 90s or early 90s, the neurodiversity aligned research as well, and then a ton of neuroscience research. We look at the various things that have been able to come about because of advancements in like MRI technology and so forth, so you can actually see what's happening in our brains and how we're responding differently to different stimuli and everything. So that is, so within FDM, we have a few different courses. We've got 2 courses or 3 courses. One is a basic one that anybody can take to understand our framework. We've got one for educators, counselors, social workers, SLPs, and OTs. And then we've got another one that is specific for behavior analysts.
Okay. And real quick, how long have you had this? How long is this organization running?
We've been running for 6 years. We formed in January of 2018. So we specifically don't we're not very good at promoting ourselves. And a lot of that has to do with our own bandwidth as autistic run organization. And all of us are over the age of 40 and have our own families and our own disabilities. And there's also like autistic aging related stuff that happens around 40. So like we all just been doing this a really long time. Our board members have been part of the autistic activist community going back into the 90s. One of our board members was active in their teen years and online. And so we comprise the elder BIPOC autistic members because we are also majority BIPOC run. Like I'm Choctaw. My second is African American, and then we have someone who is Papa, and then we have our we jokingly say our token white person. It is completely a joke. They are not a token at all. They are very much a very big part of the organization, and they're the ones that they're the person that is most readily going to call us on us on anything that we are saying that maybe is not what things that we may not think about. They're the most likely person to call us on it, which is really useful to have not an echo chamber in your board. And so yes, we all come from very different backgrounds, and we are also majority queer and trans run as well. So like we get to be in that intersectional range, and that's where we come at everything from, because we live there and that's the only thing we know. So it's easier to navigate the things that you know rather than the things you don't.
Okay.
So the reason we came about collaborating today is you posted the your first video on scrolling into trouble, and you said that you had reached out to people, and like, why was nobody reached out to from outside of the BCBA community? Because myself and then Tara Vance and Jeff Newman have been targeted in several papers now that are trying to discredit what we're saying. And I think in particular, so it's been kind of interesting to me to watch this, because whenever they do this, they're more than happy to tie Tara to neuroclastic, but never tie me to FDM. I'm not sure why, but like it's a thing. And so I think that because the way that I read in these articles as like just this some person that's saying these some things ends up meaning that I'm not considered a knowledgeable person in this area. It just looks like, oh, we're just negating what the autistic people are saying, this autistic person is saying instead of. And so I feel that also then helps to feed into like the ways that BCBAs tend to think of themselves as experts above other experts. Like it's there's plenty of research in your field that shows that to be accurate too. The ways that other fields feel about BCBAs. There's a paper that came out in like February about that, honestly. So, but because of that, I was like, this isn't okay. And so you had responded with a kind of non-apology about, sorry, you feel that way. No, no, no. It's an accurate statement. We weren't reached out to. And so you end up reaching out, and Jenny Lee and Brian, I feel like facilitated us getting to talk to each other. So yes, that's how we got here.
Yeah, of course I want to hear your perspectives. I didn't mean for that apology to be unapologetic. It was the first initial response I had because I was a little worried that I left you guys out. I didn't mean to. I just kind of went with what I was comfortable with, and I'll honestly admit that. So now I'm out here talking to you, and I cannot wait to hear more. So now, with that said, the reason we are collaborating is because of all the citations and these articles. So why don't you tell me about when this kind of started and maybe why it started? Because it's been a few articles over the past years.
Yeah. Okay. So back in 2020, after all the Black Lives Matter stuff started erupting within the larger discourse, like socially for the US, period. But I had already been pretty active within the ABA reform spaces for a couple of years at that point. And so when more people realized, oh, if we're needing to do this for this group, we should probably also be listening to autistic people about what they're saying about our field. I feel like that was a really good moment. But there was a lot of pushback that was coming from the big ABA group, and specifically Justin Leaf and Joe. How do you say his last name?
I think it's Sion, but I'm not 100% sure.
And a few others were making a big to-do about how people shouldn't be listening to us or whatever. And it ended up being discussed in the reform groups. I wasn't actually in the big ABA group at that point, but joined it because of this, because I recognize from the autistic community that I'm somebody that's highly respected, to be able to go into spaces and say my mind in a way that people find approachable. And they were trying to corner a bunch of autistic people that were in the big ABA group into agreeing to come on their podcast, the rants with Joe and Justin. And so I volunteered because I know I can do it. Like I worked in DC and did policy work. Like, this is not a big deal to me to be able to have those conversations. It's something I've been doing for a very long time. I went ahead and volunteered because nobody else was volunteering. And I don't think that Justin or Joe bothered to actually Google me before accepting that me as somebody to go ahead and invite on.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a few BCBAs that were like very worried about me, and said, hey, you should really look into who you're going on with before you do. And so I did, and found Justin's curriculum cool versus not cool. And I'm like, that's really terrible for self-esteem.
I actually read that article too, and it literally means uncool is inappropriate and cool is appropriate. That's exactly what it's defined as.
Yeah, using those words, using
It's the word choice.
colloquial,
It's the word
yeah,
choice that is horrible. Yes.
is so like you're saying this regularly to children. And so this was before we recorded, and I posted about it in the reform group and explained like what was so wrong about this curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's just how I educate. Well, how I educate publicly. The things that we offer private or in paid spaces are much more, here's what you can do instead of what you shouldn't be doing. But people need to know that there's a problem first. And so the public education is showing the problems, and we give the solutions within our paid products. Because it's how we pay for things. We pay to run all of our other disability justice related work, supplement any grant money with what we get from these courses, because we figure it's a really good way of doing mutual aid from providers into the autistic community. So I did that, and then in the comments, I made a joke. I said, something tells me Justin wasn't popular in high school. And we do the interview, we do the podcast, and they really tried to make this podcast here's what an autistic person is saying, and here's what a family member of an autistic person says, because they had Missy Olive on to juxtapose against me, not realizing that I have two autistic, I'm not using children anymore because they're adults now. I've been a parent for a really long time too. And so I came in with more knowledge than they expected, and they felt the conversation went well. And then somebody sent them a screenshot of my remark, and I guess thought I made it after the meeting. And so Justin was like very upset about my offhand remark. I'm like, I don't actually see that there's anything wrong with you not being cool in high school, because I'm autistic, and not thinking about how insulted he was by that. I was trying to reassure him that not being cool was not bad in the email, because I wasn't cool in high school either. But I was also trying to put it in like a social validity standpoint of like, how can you tell people if they're cool or not cool if you don't have a measure of coolness? Because
Yeah.
social validity matters. And being able to discern what is cool and not cool matters. And I find that people my age don't have a good understanding of what's cool anyways for kids today,
Right. I mean,
for
but the definition of
generations.
cool is always changing. It changes every
Right.
day, every month. It's always different. So there's really no definition to being cool.
Right. So there's all those pieces that I was trying to highlight with what I said, but Justin felt really hurt by it. And I now understand why Justin felt hurt by it. I didn't think about it in the moment. I was making a joke about the social validity of the curriculum.
Well, at least you're saying that now and you're saying it like this
Yeah.
straightforward. You're admitting exactly how you expressed the way you expressed it. So it
Yeah.
is what it
And
is.
then my autistic self not realizing, trying to reassure him that cool wasn't bad was not helpful at all. Because then it was like, no, I'm reinforcing that I really don't think you were, but also majority of people in high school aren't the cool kids. Like that's just how hierarchies go in schools. So I don't think about the fact that people could be insulted by that because I figure by the time that we're 40,
It
we
really shouldn't even matter anymore. Is that what you're trying to say?
right.
Yeah.
And so I didn't think about how insulted he was by it until January of 2021. They do a podcast with his dad and they take apparently 10 or 15 minutes. Somebody told me after the fact, I don't actually go and watch their stuff, that they took 10 or 15 minutes to prove that Justin was cool in high school. I'm like, oh, he was really that insulted. But then at that point, I'm like, I not sure that I care that much either, since this is what he's literally telling kids every day in practice.
Yeah, I'm a little mind blown from the fact that they actually did the episode to like maybe justify that he is cool. I thought they would have just
Yeah,
ignored it, if anything.
that's not what happened. So, like,
Yeah.
Justin has been really hurt by my remark, and I get that. And so, I highly suspect that his feelings on and why he's been doing these papers for so long is probably different than probably the rest of the authors.
Okay. Thank you for
I
sharing.
think, but the rest of the authors let's be real, progressive ABA and that cohort of people really want to keep things back in Lovaas style stuff. That's what they advocate for across the board. This is not news to anybody that knows anything about their work.
No.
So I think there is a concerted effort of saying, no, these people are wrong because what we've been doing for 50 years isn't bad or wrong because they actually believe that.
Right. And if you read their papers, you can tell that's their side and that's what they believe in. They're strong with that.
Right.
Kind of shifting into that, we're going to talk about each one of these papers because I kind of looked at all of them just to make sure, starting with the one I've already reviewed, Scrolling into Trouble. Can you
Mm-hmm.
talk about the details of the keynote and your quotation on defunding ABA exactly? Because that's the quote they quoted you on. They said you wanted to defund ABA during the keynote. Can you kind of just describe that keynote presentation for us?
So one, it wasn't even a keynote. It was just a regular presentation for the conference. I was not invited to keynote.
So it wasn't even a keynote.
It wasn't even a keynote. It was just a regular presentation.
Thank you for
Uh,
clarifying.
I haven't gone, or I had to actually have Illinois ABA pull it back up. They had to go and download it because it's not publicly available anywhere. And then I fed it through a auto captioner or auto transcription and then pulled that and then like because I don't like listening to myself talk.
Neither do I. Neither do I. Not at all.
So I fed it through Chat GPT. I'm like, find where I said defund ABA. I'm like, I don't know that I I can plausibly see how I may have said defund ABA at some point, but I also don't believe you can defund ABA. Like I've not believed that for probably 8 years, since longer than I've been even engaging with your community.
I don't think the systems are set up for that to be possible.
Right. And I know it's not. I did policy work, so I see where it is in all the policy lines that you can't do. a wholesale defund ABA. In the transcript, there is apparently nothing that suggests that I said defund ABA. The whole presentation, because I even forgot what I presented there because I've done enough presentations, I don't remember each individual one until I'm told which one it was, and then go back and look at my slides. And it was about the disparities that I saw happen with autistic people by working in DC, and like the huge disparities that happen, looking at the homelessness levels, and looking at the fact that we don't get services, looking at the problems with even college entrance, college completion, getting jobs after you're done with college. All of these are so huge disparities. And also look at like the skills that are developed within ABA programs, especially when we're looking at life skills, and you look at life skills classes in school, and you realize that the main measure that like Medicaid waiver services go by are like your ability to do your activities of daily living. And we're literally teaching those K through 12. And then people don't qualify for services because the kinds of services they could use to navigate and then be able to have autonomy in their worlds, instead of like just being home and being able to do your laundry and be able to cook your meals, when there are services that are set up to do those things.
Right.
Means that the only thing that we're teaching kids is how to survive instead of thrive in adult life. And so like I was talking about it like an across the board thing. It's not like it's a unique to ABA problem. This is an across the board problem for autistic education, autistic therapies, everything.
Okay.
It so focuses on that. And so that's what the presentation was about.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. I just wanted
Yeah.
to know more, especially because we know I didn't reach out to you, and I do apologize for that, and I'll say it face to face now. But we're going to move into the next one, which was a call for discussion on stereotypic behavior. So the authors cite you multiple times. One, they say that you say all ABA is abuse, and they also label you as someone who said, or as part of a group who is a vocal defense against stimming. So I just want to
Yes.
open the floor for discussion on that, to let you express what you want.
Okay, so I am an open defender of stimming. I also have a lot of caveats with that because I recognize the higher prevalence of police interactions with BIPOC autistics, especially those that have body movements that are atypical, and how that is more likely to be used to call police. And so like I also advocate like a lot of other things, not just allowing stimming, but like supporting our sensory systems so that we don't have to stim in the first place. But if we do, then finding ways to make it accessible to that person in the environments that they're going to be in.
Okay, can
So
you
that
elaborate on what you just said?
this gets into my framework development. So my framework
Okay.
development looks at sensory integration, executive functioning, and how that feeds into motor skills, communication, social interactions, and emotional regulation. And
Okay.
so what we're wanting to do, because if we recognize that stimming is a regulatory behavior for your sensory systems, then there are ways that you can support those sensory systems without getting to the point of needing to have stimming be the frontline defense. So if the problem is that the person needs to have their body moving, then we can look at flexible seating instead of trying to give a stem, or instead of them stimming in their seat or getting up and walking around and pacing, we can give a different method of sitting that then allows them to have that movement. So wobble seats, or rocking chairs, or beanbag chairs, or many, many options of things, because this is the way we can support that particular sense. So we think about what the sense is that the person is trying to get, because what we know is the reason that somebody might be moving around a lot is because they have a really high need for movement for their vestibular system and their proprioceptive system in order to be able to balance and everything. So if you're keeping a rigid stance, then that is very taxing, and that's going to end up leading to where you're going to end up having to express it because your body's not getting those senses in the first place. So you have to have conscious thought to make your body stay still. And that's going to reduce how much you're able to access the rest of the environment.
Wow.
So this is why I think people should be listening to me and why like them trying to discredit what I'm saying. Like, no, this is all based in neuroscience.
That makes
This
sense. If
last,
you're thinking about trying to be still and your body wants to move, you're probably not going to be able to hear anything that's coming at you.
right. So like that it just makes sense because we only have so much cognitive ability in any given moment. That's like true for all humans. And if we're taking up so much of it for these other things. So that's how we like support bodies. But then if we do still see stimming happening, we can recognize that that's still showing a need and we should allow that. But we should probably also look at other ways we can help support that in the various environments. And it is going to look different in literally every environment. But then I think that's a referral to OT and not a BCBA doing it.
Right. Okay. Well, still, thank you for sharing that. That was well
Yeah.
illustrated. I learned something right there. But kind of back to the all ABA is abuse. Can you kind
Yeah.
of explain that quote?
Well, if you consider what I just said with we're teaching all these really rigid things, then what we're doing is telling somebody that they need to experience active trauma throughout in their bodies at every moment because that is denying them a need. Like it is a need if their
Right.
brain is not getting that sense.
Right.
And that is going to inherently be traumatic for that person.
Okay.
And so if we are literally rigidly telling everyone that these are the ways that we need to be, and this is what we need to do, and this is how it needs to work, then that is inherently abusive because they are not getting their needs met. And that creates disordered attachment. And like, then we've got all of these trauma responses that come with it. And we all know what they are. Escape is flight. Aggression is fight. Hiding on your desk is most likely a freeze response. And then the one that y'all are trying to get to tends to be the fawn response where you're doing what people tell you to.
Okay.
And so if we recognize distress within that framework and we're not addressing the distress, we're just trying to address the presentation of the distress and never meeting that need, that is going to be traumatic for that person for their entire life.
Right. And I think that kind of transitions me into something they said about you in the next article, which is concerns about ABA-based intervention and evaluation and recommendations. So in this one, they cite you and Lynch about the 40-hour week. And then they also cite you discussing PTSD symptoms, which is kind of where I think you were going with what you just said, right?
Yes. And
Okay.
so this does rely on Henny. I'm going to mess up her last name. I can't say her last name. I'm not going to try. And I will admit, there are methodological problems with her study, and we are very aware of many of the methodological problems with it, but it doesn't negate that we do see those. We can say that about a lot of research without it being inaccurate. What we also know, even getting outside of her paper, there are papers out that show that autistic people have higher rates of PTSD. Like that is true without making it about ABA. It is true it is true within the research that we have higher rates of PTSD and that we have more PTSD symptoms or post-traumatic stress symptoms because that's a specific, I'm saying it that way because it's a specific assessment tool that looks at post-traumatic stress symptoms.
Okay.
We're not diagnosing, we're just saying that there is a high rate of symptoms.
Okay. And I think in that article, they said that you said there's more symptoms with children who receive ABA. Can you explain that?
That is the Henny paper. There is anecdotal notes that I have been told from many, many practitioners in SLP, OT, and psychologists and social workers and whatnot. So all of those fields that anecdotally say that the children that they see that go through ABA show more symptomology. And so that's what I'm talking about is that anecdotal. Do we have specific research behind it? No. That's because y'all aren't doing it. And honestly, that's something that's going to need to come from within your field before y'all are going to believe it. But there's no reason to think that that's not going to be the case if we're talking about the kind of trauma that I'm talking about happening on a daily basis because of the way that we address autism through behavior instead of proactive solutions for the actual things that are happening neurologically.
Can you discuss the 40-hour week too? Because I know there was actually a funny joke about like working a 40-hour week as an adult, because that's already hard enough as is. So I think that's what you guys were talking about in the.
That is not actually my quote.
It's Lynch. It's Lynch, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mine actually said 20 to 40.
Oh, okay.
Because I recognize that there's a variability in how many hours that most children get. However, I also know that y'all have research that shows 10 hours is more beneficial even. And that if you go over that, now that is beneficial within y'all's framework, but it's still like, we don't need to be doing 40-hour work weeks.
I've never believed we needed to be doing 40-hour weeks. Never. Not even as an adult.
And then let's be a little bit more real here. Ron Leaf got onto their podcast and said, oh, we made that up because it seemed like 40 hours. He literally said it for the 87 paper.
Oh, I did not know that. Thank you. I did not know that. I'm a little bit shocked by that, but thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know which episode it is, but I'm sure if you're interviewing any of the other autistic, I'm pretty sure Jeff knows which one that one is. Okay. So yeah, no, like they're caping for something they know is made up.
Okay.
And I think that there is a really big problem when we're trying to do those, even the 20-hour weeks where we're not, because what you see from the parent side, because I look at things from all the vantage points because I get to be in a particular position to do that as a parent, as an educator, and then as an autistic person. I get to see all the sides. And what you see a lot with kids is that parents are doing preschool, then ABA, even if it is the 20 hours. And where is the time for children to play?
Be children?
Yeah, because that's the best way to learn is through play. And honestly, there are some interventions that look at helping parents understand how to play with their children better in that 12-month to 36-month range, and how that can reduce the stress symptoms that are associated with autism. So like, just because of all these different things that, like the differences in our body language and all these things because of our sensory systems, parents don't know how to interact with us. So like you get that delayed development because they're not getting engaged in the same way that neurotypical kids do because of these the developmental trajectory that we've been taught, but not realizing there's other signs of that play that the kids are trying to express, but the parents may not be catching. But once the parents do, we see reduction in stress symptoms. Okay. So I think that we could get away from doing high rates of intervention and instead be doing more to help parents just see how they can play with their kids. And that can help develop parents that are taking their kids like into play groups and stuff. Oh, this is how we can help them play with the peers and whatnot. And so
the way you're describing kind of reminds me of like parent-child interaction therapy.
It's not the same.
It's not the same. Okay. I just wanted to see.
No, because PCIT is still very heavily behavior modification based.
It is.
And so we're not looking at modification at all. We're just trying to help parents be able to relate to their kids, because then that helps the kids feel safer, and like that improves communication, and that improves trust and rapport and attachment and all these things.
Okay.
And the research supports all of that. There's a reason that I don't like ABA and why I do this work, because I'm like, no, there's a ton of other things out there that show us improvements without ever trying to change behavior.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that we can really get away from the 40-hour or even the 20 hours. And honestly, so I'm very different than many autistic people in the anti-ABA spaces because of specifically what I've developed and what I do and like how I go about everything, because there's a lot of people that are autistic therapy providers or behavior analysts that are coming at things from that education standpoint. And I never had that. Like I learned everything because I had to as a person, as an autistic person, and as an autistic parent to autistic kids.
Okay.
And so I don't have a degree for credibility. I have to back everything I say on people that are credible.
Right.
And so I just always done that to try and make sure that people are clear about what I'm saying is, no, this is not my opinion. This is heavily research-based.
Right. And you're very brave for stepping into this circle and expressing what you want to express, just so you feel safe. You can always express anything you want with me. Even though I am someone who does practice ABA, I don't care. I like to collaborate with people with differing opinions. And I'm someone you can talk to very easily about this. I'm never going to discredit what you say just because I don't agree with it. I will never do that.
Thank you. It's not a fear of mine. The reason I'm upset about all of this is the way that I have seen a measurable impact for my organization and who comes to us over the time that he's been discrediting me over time.
So continuing on that, throughout those articles, throughout all of them, and even that chapter, which I didn't have access to, we're going to skip over that. Do you think you're going to continue to be cited in the future? And then what are your thoughts on that possibility if that continues to happen?
I do.
Okay.
I expect it. I think it's a really easy thing to do to discredit somebody that doesn't have access to publish in your field, because I'm not in your field.
It is. That was very well said. It is very easy to do that.
Like even coming out of this paper and the people that wanted to do response papers to it, none of them were really looking at the actual substance of the paper, and were looking more at the ethical violations that they did by publishing the paper.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't see that there's any effort even within the behavior analytic community to really push back against these narratives. There is a concerted effort to prove that there's nothing, or prove that neurodiversity aligned things or neurodiversity affirming things are okay within behavior analysis, but I don't feel that it is really targeting the fact that this cohort of people have been coming after autistic people for so long. And I don't think that there's any effort right now to change that either. Which is why I wanted to be able to come on. Excuse me a second. Yeah, I just don't see the effort within the behavior analytic community to understand the impact that it's having on our autistic orgs, because I represent one, Tara represents another. Neuroclastic has much more reach than mine does, because they are more about telling stories about the autistic community from the autistic community standpoint, whereas what we're trying to do is trying to shape practice. Like that makes us a very different autistic org than any of the other autistic orgs out there, because that is our whole focus, is changing practice. Now, the stuff that we do here is different than some of our other initiatives. Our other initiatives really look at things from more of a public health standpoint than they do direct advocacy within these fields. But because there hasn't been a targeted paper about listening to, as Brian likes to talk about it, critical
friends of ABA.
Yeah, I don't consider myself a critical friend, and I think he said that in the last one. I do not consider myself a friend to ABA. I'm very aware of the fact that I don't want ABA practiced.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that y'all aren't the biggest providers to autistic people. So we come at this very much as a harm reduction standpoint by advocating in your field. That is purposeful. We took a long time to get to the point of being willing to do it. I did a lot of the work that I was doing within the bcba community. I was keeping completely separate from the org stuff, to the point that I don't think that many people even knew I had an org. But my own burnout, and then the changes we saw within the private equity funding and all of that. Honestly, even some people I know from high school that practice in these different fields that were talking about the private equity that was flowing in, how they were kind of being gobbled up by ABA companies, or even bought ABA companies because they had all this private equity funding coming in, and how scary it actually was, because they were wondering how efficacy was being handled. And we know at this point, efficacy is not being handled. Heck,
Oh,
even
no.
Justin has a paper about it.
No.
So so all of that combined together, and then because we do all have like half the board has a policy background, we saw how much work it's going to take to get it policies even changed in any sort of way, because one, each state level lobby has, or each state level org has its own lobbying people. Y'all don't spare expense on that. And y'all aren't the only ones. We also get that from Autism Speaks at the state level and at the national level. We also see it from all the parent groups and parent people that are not willing to give up ABA. So we felt that we needed to go towards y'all, because it's the only way to reduce the harm of what happens within the majority of ABA practice.
And I agree with what you said there, which is why I'm hosting you, and I want to talk to you, and I want to share your message and what you have to say about things, especially after I talked about you in my last video. But with that said, is there anything else you would like to mention here at the end, especially maybe some CEUs that could be helpful for us to hear, so we can gain better perspective on what you're trying to push, the image you want to see? Is there anything else you want to leave us with?
Like, people need to understand the impact they're making to our community. But overall, I think that a lot of behavior analysts are afraid that we're trying to like get rid of all the fields. I'm like, no, I actually think that there's a way that y'all fit into this broader picture of wholesale systems change for practice. Because I think that there are ways that we can be working with autistic children to help build self-advocacy skills, which is one of the things that we talk about in the course. Is doing that, looking at problem solving skills, that I think that because behavior analysts and RBTs are trained to pick up on cues. Now, right now, y'all are taught to pick up on cues to ignore them. And we're telling you the opposite, to like, no, those things that you're ignoring right now are actually the ones that you need to be looking at the most, because they're the initial steps of dysregulation. That all of that, because you're taught to really drill down on what's causing this, that you just need the extra step to drill down a little bit more. And then that allows for a lot better targeting of like, oh, for these things, we need to go to an occupational therapist, but like having that behavior point as a start point, because behavior is so multifaceted, it's not just one thing, that having people that can look at behavior and drill it down further, but it requires drilling it down much further than behavior analysis is doing right now.
Yeah.
I just really feel like there is a place of doing those assessment pieces, of doing, and then figuring out what it is that we are teaching, because even when we get into that, like, I think there's a lot of misunderstandings that come out of what the neurodiversity community says about what we need to do, that are trying to get at the problem, but because they're distilled down in bite-sized chunks for social media, that there's something missed. And so it's really important for people to be listening to those of us that are actually trying to move everything forward, because we're not We know it's a wholesale problem. And so I want people to understand that we recognize it's a wholesale problem. It's a whole system problem. And that there is a place for everyone at the end too. But we've got to move things. And that requires everyone. It doesn't just require my org. We're doing this so that people can start doing research, so people can start comparing it to other forms of behavior analysis practice. Those all have to happen before we can ever look at change in policy, before we can ever look at change in regulation, before we can ever look at change legislatively. That has to happen. So we need behavior analysts that actually believe in moving things forward to start listening, so that but that requires to stop listening to people that are trying to stay in these old ways of being, because they're not looking at up-to-date information anymore. And it's clear they're not, because of the arguments that they make.
I think that was a very good way to end this discussion, especially with everything we said about ABA at the start and all the negative things. I like how you ended on a very positive note there on coming together. I appreciate your time, Oswin, and I hope that we can collaborate again maybe in the future as well.
That would be wonderful.
Awesome. Thank you.
My name is Troy, everyone. If you liked today's video, please smash that like button, subscribe to help the channel, and turn on notifications by hitting the bell so you never miss a video.